If you think a 401k is your retirement plan, I need to interrupt you before the next contribution comes out of your paycheck. Because what ruins people is not that they invested. What ruins people is that they mistook a supplement for a solution. A house paid off and a 401k statement in a folder can make a person feel safe for 20 years. Then one day the numbers stop looking like comfort and start looking like a delayed panic, and by then the clock is no longer your friend. I have spent my life around capital, and I can tell you something plain. Most financial disasters do not arrive with a siren. They arrive as a respectable habit repeated for 30 years. That is the danger here. The 401k was never built to carry your entire future on its back. It was built as an extra leg under the table. A support, a supplement, a useful tool. Then millions of people turned it into the whole machine and hoped one account, one paid-off house, and one government check would somehow produce freedom. Hope is not a retirement strategy. Arithmetic is. And arithmetic is brutal with people who confuse participation with ownership. The mistake is not using a 401k. The mistake is worshiping it. The mistake is believing that because money disappears from your paycheck every month, wealth is automatically being built somewhere in the dark on your behalf. The mistake is assuming that because the plan has tax benefits and a respectable name, it must be enough. Enough is a number. Most people never calculate it. That is why they spend half a lifetime walking toward a destination. They never measured. I want to talk to you the way I would talk to my own family if they were about to build their future on the wrong foundation. Not with soft phrases, not with brochure language. I want to show you the trap under the trap, because this is not really about a retirement account. This is about whether your money is building freedom or simply giving you the feeling that freedom is being handled. There is a difference. And that difference is where entire lives split apart. The first thing you must understand is that a 401k became popular partly because it moved responsibility away from the employer and onto the worker. That is the part people do not like to say out loud. There was a time when many workers expected a pension. The burden of investment failure sat with the company. The company had to keep the machine funded. The company had to carry the promise. Then the system changed. The risk migrated quietly, elegantly, and with perfect corporate logic. The responsibility moved from the institution to the individual. What used to be their long-term liability became your lifelong problem. That single shift changed the psychology of work in America. Now the worker must be the earner, the saver, the allocator, the risk manager, the tax strategist, and the retirement actuary all at once. Most people were never trained for any of those jobs, yet they are expected to perform them while raising children, paying bills, driving to work, and trying to stay sane. So they do the simplest thing. They contribute, they trust, they wait. That is where the retirement mirage begins. The retirement mirage is the first mechanism. It works like this. You see money going in, you see a statement, you see a company match, maybe you hear the phrase tax advantage, you hear the phrase long term. And because the account has the appearance of seriousness, your brain begins to treat the problem as solved. But contributions are not the same as outcomes. A person can be disciplined for 30 years and still arrive short if the machine they trusted was too expensive, too weak, or too small for the life they intended to fund. This is the hardest part for many people to accept because it feels unfair. They did what they were told, they stayed employed, they put money away, they delayed gratification, they did not buy every toy, they tried to be responsible, but the market does not grade effort. It grades capital, time, costs, and returns. If your future lifestyle needs $1.5 million and your system is mathematically on track to produce a fraction of that, then your discipline is noble and your plan is still broken. That is why I do not start with motivation. I start with measurement. You should never ask, am I contributing? You should ask, what is this machine designed to produce after fees, after taxes, after reality? And is that enough to buy the freedom I think it will buy? That is a very different question. And most people avoid it because it feels like looking in a mirror after years of telling yourself a kinder story. Now let me show you the second mechanism, because this one quietly robs people who think they are being prudent. I call it the fee leak. A leak in a boat does not look dramatic in the first minute. That is what makes it dangerous. Water does not need your permission to sink you. It only needs time. Fees work the same way. People hear 1%, 1.25%, 1.5%, and their mind dismisses it. It sounds small, it sounds harmless, it sounds like background noise. But 1% taken every year from a compounding machine is not a detail. It is a second investor attached to your future, collecting rent from your discipline. And this investor never has a bad year. Imagine two people. Each puts away $500 a month. Each does it for 30 years. Each earns the same market return before costs. One pays a low fee, the other pays a high fee. The difference at the end is not a few $1,000s. It can be the difference between breathing easy and going back to work in your late 60s. That is what people miss fees. Do not just reduce a balance, they erase future compounding on every dollar removed. You do not lose $1. You lose what that dollar would have become over decades. That is capital murder committed with paperwork. If a person paying 0.5% retires with something like $474,000, and a person paying 1.5% retires with something closer to $377,000. The extra fee did not merely cost a little. It ate nearly $100,000 of future freedom. $100,000 is not a rounding error. It is years of groceries, years of property taxes, years of medical flexibility, years of not panicking. And here is the insult. Many people paying those higher fees are not even getting superior performance. They are overpaying for mediocrity. They are being told their money is being managed, while their money manager becomes the one compounding with certainty. That is the fee leak. It is silent, respectable, and absolutely ruthless. Now we come to the third mechanism. I call it the tax fog. Whenever someone tells you an account is tax advantaged, your next question should not be, wonderful, where do I sign? Your next question should be, advantage for whom, under what future? And when exactly do I pay? Because taxes delayed are not taxes erased. A traditional 401k allows you to postpone the tax hit. You put in pre-tax money today, the account grows. Years pass. Then one day you begin pulling the money out, and the bill arrives at the end of the story. A Roth asks you to take the tax medicine up front. You pay now, less goes in. But what grows can often come out with far more clarity and far less future bargaining with Washington. Neither is automatically superior in all cases. That is where lazy advice ruins people. The real question is not whether you like paying taxes. No one likes paying taxes. The real question is what you think your life will look like later. If you believe your best financial years are behind you, if you expect lower taxable income in the future, if your current tax burden is heavy and current relief matters, the traditional path may help. But if your real ambition is not to become old and poor with a modest account, but to become wealthier over time through businesses, investments, and additional streams of income, then your future may not be lower income at all. It may be the opposite in that world. Postponing taxes can become a very expensive story you told yourself when your earning power was smaller. And then there is the political reality. Governments drowning in debt eventually start looking around the room for revenue. I do not pretend to know exactly what tax code will exist decades from now. Neither does anyone else. But uncertainty itself matters. Blindly assuming lower taxes later is not analysis. It is optimism disguised as planning. The tax fog makes people feel clever because they deferred pain. But sometimes clarity is worth more than temporary relief. I have never liked building a lifetime strategy on assumptions I cannot control. That brings me to the fourth mechanism, and this one is the cruelest because it punishes people who never bothered to calculate the finish line. I call it the goal gap. The average account balance floating around this country tells a sad story. Median balances tell an even sadder one. Many workers are nowhere near the amount required to fund the life they imagine, yet they continue behaving as if steady participation guarantees eventual sufficiency. It does not. If your desired spending in the later years of life is $60,000 a year, and you apply a rough 4% withdrawal rule, you are not talking about a nice little balance. You are talking about a pool of capital in the neighborhood of $1.5 million. That number shocks people, but The number is not a problem. The problem is that they never wanted to see it. Once you see it, excuses become arithmetic. A person with a six-figure balance is not close simply because the number has 6 digits. A person with $250,000 is not secure simply because it sounds like a lot of money at a barbecue. Security depends on the cash flow the asset base can reliably produce, not on whether the number sounds impressive to somebody with no calculator. This is why so many households become emotionally attached to phrases like, "My house is paid off," or "I have a 401k." Those are milestones. They are not verdicts. A paid-off house reduces one category of expense. Good, that matters. A retirement account creates a pool of investable assets. Good, that matters too. But groceries, healthcare, insurance, travel, taxes, repairs, family support, inflation, and plain old living do not care about slogans. They care about the monthly math. You do not retire because you own a house. You retire because you own enough productive assets or enough saleable assets to finance the life you intend to live without selling your time under pressure. That is the dividing line. Now I want to push this even harder because this is where the identity flip has to happen. Most people are trained to think like contributors. I want you to begin thinking like an owner. A contributor says, "I put money in every month." An owner says, "What do I own? What does it earn? What does it cost me? And how many years of freedom can it buy?" A contributor celebrates activity. An owner demands output. A contributor asks whether the account exists. An owner asks whether the machine works. That identity change is enormous. It moves you from being a passive participant in a retirement product to being the chief capital allocator of your own life. And once that shift happens, you stop asking childish questions like, "Is the 401k good or bad?" That is the wrong question. A hammer is not good or bad. It depends on what you are building. The right question is, how should this account fit inside a larger freedom system? That is where adults separate from children in finance. I have never believed the goal of life was to crawl to 65 exhausted, then suddenly begin living. I think that concept is intellectually weak and emotionally tragic. What most people call retirement is not really retirement. What they want is autonomy. They want the power to say no. They want to choose their schedule. They want their bills paid by assets rather than by fatigue. They want to stop negotiating with life from a position of necessity. That means the target is not an age. The target is financial freedom. And financial freedom only comes in two durable forms. Either you own assets you can sell for enough capital to fund the rest of your life, or you own assets that send you cash on their own, on a schedule that can carry your life without your labor. If you have neither, then what you possess may be income. But it is not independence. That is not an insult. It is a diagnosis. Once you understand that, the whole conversation about the 401k changes. It stops being the star of the show. It becomes one tool among several useful, sometimes excellent, sometimes limited, always incomplete on its own. Now let me tell you how I would think about the protocol from here, because philosophy without procedure is entertainment. First, inspect the machine, find the expense ratios. Not tomorrow, not when you feel more confident. Now, people will spend 3 weekends comparing televisions and then leave 6 figures in funds they have never audited. That is financial negligence dressed up as busyness. If the plan offers decent low-cost broad market exposure, good. If it is loaded with high-fee, underperforming options, you need to know that, not guess. No second, define the tax lane you are in. Do not choose between traditional and Roth by copying your coworker or by parroting a slogan from the internet. Ask what your current tax burden is. Ask what kind of asset base you intend to build outside the plan. Ask whether you want current relief or future certainty. Ask what future tax risk you are implicitly accepting. There is no glory in pretending all paths are interchangeable. Third, calculate your freedom number. Take the annual life you want to live, not the life you hope to survive. Include the ugly expenses, not just the pleasant ones. Healthcare, home repairs, travel, inflation, family surprises. Then determine what asset base would need to exist for that life to be supported with prudence. If the number disturbs you, good reality should interrupt fantasy early, not late. Fourth, widen the asset base. This is where most people freeze because they want a single account to save them from thinking. But wealth has always favored people willing to build more than one pillar. For some, that means taxable brokerage accounts invested intelligently and patiently. For others, that means real estate producing income. For some, it means building a small business that can either be sold later or throw off cash over time. For many, it means a combination. The details differ. The principle does not. You need assets beyond the symbolic comfort of one retirement bucket. Fifth, improve the return engine without becoming reckless. This is another area where people hurt themselves. They hear that returns matter, and suddenly they start behaving like gamblers. That is not what I mean. I mean understanding that a low return, high fee path can delay freedom by years or decades. If your money compounds at 3, 4, or 5% after drag, the journey becomes long and unforgiving. If you can own productive assets at stronger rates over long stretches with discipline, patience, and sound judgment, time begins to work for you in a different way. The point is not hot tips. The point is friction reduction and return quality. If you can remove unnecessary fees, choose better vehicles, stay invested, and avoid foolish interruptions, you have already improved the machine without adding drama 6. Convert contribution habits into ownership habits. This is where many lives turn. When a car payment ends, too many people upgrade the car. When a mortgage ends, too many people upgrade the house. When a salary rises, too many people upgrade the costume. The wiser move is to redirect finished obligations into asset acquisition. Every time a recurring bill dies, an ownership channel should open. That is how ordinary incomes build extraordinary resilience. Your paycheck should not merely feed consumption and retirement slogans. It should steadily purchase pieces of freedom. Now let me put the whole thing together in the plainest possible terms. The 401k can help you. It can lower taxes now or later. It can automate discipline. It can capture employer matching. It can create long-term capital if used intelligently. But it can also lull you into complacency, bleed you through fees, trap you in tax assumptions, and leave you dramatically short if you mistake it for the whole plan. That is why I never want a person to ask whether they should stop using a 401k in some theatrical all or nothing way. I want them to ask a far sharper question. Is this account serving my freedom system, or is it being used as a substitute for one? That question exposes everything. Because if the answer is that this one account is carrying all your hopes, all your passivity, all your deferred thinking, then the problem is bigger than the account. The problem is that you outsourced your future to a default setting. And default settings are usually designed for administrative convenience, not human flourishing. You cannot afford that, not with longer lifespans, not with inflation, not with healthcare costs, not with uncertain taxes, not with median balances telling us just how unprepared so many people really are. I have seen enough cycles to know that the people who win are not always the smartest in the room. Very often they are the people who are willing to face simple truths earlier than everyone else. They face the fee truth, they face the tax truth, they face the arithmetic truth, they face the truth that freedom is built from ownership, not from hope. And then they behave accordingly for a very long time. That is why I want to leave you with a harder ending than most people will give you. One day your labor will slow down whether you want it to or not. Energy changes, health changes, markets change, family needs change, time is undefeated. When that day arrives, your life will ask you a question with no room for rhetoric. Did you build assets or did you build excuses? Did you create a machine that can carry you, or did you spend decades comforting yourself with a contribution receipt? Did you become an owner or did you remain a participant? That is the test. You do not need to panic. You do not need to throw away every plan you have. You do not need to become extreme. But you do need to look straight at your system and decide whether it is producing freedom or merely the impression of responsibility, because those are not the same thing. If your 401k is efficient, low-cost, tax-smart, and part of a broader architecture of asset ownership, keep using it as a servant. If it is expensive, vague, underperforming, and functioning as your entire imagined future, stop treating it like a savior. The savior is not the account. The savior is clarity, discipline, and ownership repeated over time. That is how a person stops being retirement anxious and starts becoming financially dangerous. And that is the contract I would ask you to make with yourself now. Not that you will contribute, not that you will hope, not that you will wait, but that from this day forward, every dollar you direct will be judged by one question. Only, does this buy appearance or does this buy freedom? Your life will eventually become the answer, because the danger was never that the 401k existed. The danger was that you were taught to stop thinking the moment it did. Do not stop there. Build the second pillar, build the third. Build the kind of balance sheet that lets you negotiate with the world from strength instead of dependency. The future does not reward the person who merely saved inside the approved container. It rewards the person who understood the machine, removed the leaks, widened the ownership base, and turned income into lasting control. That is the real retirement plan. Everything else is just paperwork